3 weeks ago, on the 2nd, May 2nd, yes, the Pentagon announced what Europe had refused to hear for 15 years. 5,000 American soldiers are leaving Germany. The deployment of Tomahawk cruise missiles and hypersonic missiles in Europe, which was promised for this year, has been canceled. The aircraft carrier Nimitz, along with its escort group, has been sent to the Caribbean Sea, closer to home. On the same day, there was a vote in the United Nations General Assembly. 141 in favor, 8 against. What kind of vote is this? A resolution on the obligation of all states to combat climate change. But has it been proven that humans can influence the climate? Or is it stated somewhere that a country can be forced to live by UN laws? But the most interesting thing is that there were plenty of people who agreed to be ordered around. A lot of people agreed to be made into slaves, but who disagreed? And here, gentlemen, it gets insanely interesting. 8 voted against. Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Belarus, Yemen, Liberia, Israel, and the United States. Remember this list. He's not telling us about the weather. He's telling us about those who refuse to hand over decisions about their internal affairs to foreign hands. And why did the mainstream show this result on line 33 when it should have been first? It should have been in the first line, right at the top. And, well, the third story isn't from today. It's exactly 1 year old. But it's, as they say, along the same lines. May 21, 2025, a year ago, in the Oval Office, there was a certain Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of the Republic of South Africa, and Trump did something that no American president had done in 25 years. He asked to dim the lights. He put a folder on the table, and he showed the footage, mass funerals, rows of white crosses. He said, "This is what's happening in your country. And by the way, what are you going to do about it?" The next day, it turned out that the footage wasn't from South Africa, but from Congo. Well, it's still the same thing. But there was a scandal, so the critics shouted, "Hooray! Headlines all over the world." Trump showed a fake. I mean, they showed the wrong ones, the same white people were being killed, but they showed the wrong graves, right? The story seemed to be over. A year passed. The footage wasn't from there. That's true. But the question hasn't changed at all. And today, exactly a year later, we have something we didn't have back then. 12 months of new data, and we'll look at them calmly. 3 stories, 1 direction. America is no longer the world's accountant. That pays for other people's security, other people's environmental guilt, and other people's historical conscience. And that's the most unexpected thing. That's good news. In my opinion, that's wonderful news. First of all, for those who believe in freedom, stay until the very end. I'll tell you about a very rare sign that has appeared in Washington over the past year, and which, in my opinion, most accurately shows that the wind has changed. That will be at the end. America is pulling back. Let's start with the facts. No emotions. May 2nd, 2026, the Pentagon. A dry statement. 5,000 American servicemen will be withdrawn from Germany within 6 or 6.5 months. After the withdrawal, 30,000 soldiers will remain in Germany. Not so few. The buildup that Biden started after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is being rolled back. At the same time, the deployment of a battalion is being canceled. Long-range assets with Tomahawks and hypersonic missiles. That is, Dark Eagle, let's say if you pronounce it in Russian. They were scheduled for this year. Berlin learned about this from a press release. Not from a phone call. The ally learned from a press release, and the trigger was not abstract. A few days before the decision, the Chancellor of Germany, that is Friedrich Merz, publicly stated that the United States, he didn't whisper this quietly to someone in bed under the covers to his wife. He said this publicly. The United States has been humiliated by Iran, and that Washington has no strategy in the Iran war. This is, well, how should I put it? I don't know. Unprecedented criticism. That's the mildest thing I could come up with. Yes, from an ally who has been receiving American weapons for 8 decades. American soldiers, the American nuclear umbrella, taken for granted. Like, guys, you came here, you're protecting us very well, and meanwhile we'll criticize you. Trump responded in the only language he now seems ready to use with Europe, with the European capitals. You criticize our strategy? Nice. Defend yourselves. In a few weeks, the Nimitz aircraft carrier is leaving. And not to the Mediterranean Sea. Like it has for the past 20 years, not even to Taiwan. It's heading to the southern Caribbean waters, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Where to? To America's backyard. And right there, the Justice Department's indictment against 94-year-old Raul Castro on charges of murder. None of this is a coincidence. It's a signal. American military power is coming back home. And it works where America has real interests, not your interests, our interests. In Berlin, there's clear confusion. Poland has been arming itself for 5 years, suspecting the American umbrella wouldn't last forever, and it won't. So, after hearing that every day, they finally started to suspect it. Today, Poland has the largest land army on the continent, bigger than Germany's, bigger than France's, and I think that's not for nothing. Well, and now, why is that, right? A superficial explanation. Trump is an isolationist. He doesn't like allies. He counts every dollar closely. That's only partly true. That's the shallowest part of the truth. The real reason, of course, is deeper, and it's about principle. And it's not about the person. 80 years ago. In 48, the Marshall Plan started. A year later, NATO was created. I think it was a year after that. Since then and up to today, Europe has lived under a system that no nation in human history has endured for so long. No one has endured it, right? Or wouldn't have endured it without consequences. Someone else was paying for Europe's security. Its decisions about war and peace were made somewhere else. Its military budgets were, forgive my bluntness, symbolic. For decades, Germany kept its defense spending below the level it demanded of others, Belgium and the Netherlands, even lower. And all of this worked because in any situation you could just pick up the phone and say, "Hello, Washington, we have a problem here. Take care of it and go to sleep." But now the phone isn't answering, and if it does answer, it asks, "So how much did you spend on your own army?" And that's when things get really interesting. By the way, I'd like to mention Berdyaev. I often remember him because his philosophy of inequality is such a brilliant book. So, 100 years ago, he described this exact same situation. He formulated what modern political science doesn't dare to say. Listen to this. It works. It works in all areas. What a person receives for free destroys him. The most people say today is this, that when a person gets something for free, he doesn't appreciate it. That's not the point. It leads him to moral and other kinds of degradation. A gift without effort takes away the recipient's dignity. Freedom, well, even Berdyaev said, freedom is not a gift, it's a burden. Do you want freedom? You have to carry it. Europe received its security as a little gift. In 80 years, this has changed it, and I say this with love because well, ladies and gentlemen, I was raised just like you on European values. Music, novels, architecture, everything you can imagine, right? But today, what Europe has become and what honestly fills me with contempt is a politically infantile space where there are grown men and women. Also, it seems like adults are discussing, well, let's say the Russian threat. Any kind, really, right? The same way children complain to their teacher about a classmate. We won't defend ourselves, right? But let someone else come and solve it. That's what my grandchildren were told at their American school. Not to respond to a hit or a spit, well, a spit, so to speak, with a punch in the face, but to run to the teacher. Someone spat on me. This happened to Europe over 80 years of free protection. And now the second layer, psychology. Psychology. My beloved Andrew Galambos, an engineer, an astrophysicist who became a philosopher, a father in leftist science, a thinker on whom we Well, basically build our understanding of freedom. Columbus formulated a very simple statement that turned my life upside down when I first heard it. A state that has leased out its own defense has not really leased it out. It is not sovereign. It is merely a tenant of its own existence. The primary property of every nation is its life, its land, its choice. If you don't pay for your own defense, you don't own that choice. Period. It's simple arithmetic of freedom, no matter how sophisticated it may seem. You can check it. Never in the history of humanity has it happened that by handing over the defense of your freedom to someone else, you didn't end up losing it. And now look at what's starting to happen in Europe right before our eyes. Germany. A complete epical shift. 100 billion euros into a special defense fund. Poland, purchasing 1,000 tanks and millions of shells. France. Macron has been talking about a European nuclear umbrella for the second year in a row. Thank God. Finally. Because he understands that the American one, even if it hasn't completely fallen apart, well, it's worn out. Sweden and Finland are already in NATO. Britain. Real buildup. Even Italy has started to move. Well, Macron's people will still try to free ride on someone else. None of this, not a single one of these steps would have happened without the American retreat. Not a single one. Why pay when Uncle's already covering it? Just whistle and Uncle will come running. Here's the main point. And here I'll ask you to pause the video for a second and think, why is this good? Not for America, for Europe. This is actually good. It's the best. Well, it's good for everyone, but it's best for Europe. Why? Because a nation that didn't defend itself doesn't exist as a nation. It exists as a geographical name, as a tourist destination, as a museum. A beautiful story. Well, at least they make good money by telling stories. Look how fierce we used to be. There you go. By the way, from the moment she gave up her protection to someone else, she no longer has a say in her own fate. She only thinks she does. For some reason, she thinks that someday she'll repay it with something else, because her fate depends on who pays for the army and who controls that army. Taking back defense means taking back sovereignty. And sovereignty is the first condition for everything else, for freedom, for property, for culture, for the future. And without it, everything else is just a Potemkin facade. Now, why is this good for America? Yes? I see. Trillions of dollars, which for 3 generations have been taken from the pockets of American taxpayers to defend countries that could very well defend themselves. That's coming back home now. And no, you can't get those trillions back. But we're not going to spend any more now. American men and women in uniform will stop getting involved in other people's conflicts that aren't that important to America. They, as they say, don't affect our survival. Well, it would be nice if things were good there, but it's not really our business. And most importantly, America is returning to what its first president, Washington, spoke about in his farewell address. Trade with everyone, get entangled with no one, especially with Europeans. He didn't particularly like them. This principle, well, 227 years ago, was not formulated out of selfishness. It was formulated out of the understanding that a free nation cannot be the world's policeman and remain free at the same time. These two roles are incompatible. One erodes the other. We need to stop doing this. That's easy for you gentlemen, for those on the outside, to say, oh, you come here, so you must have taken responsibility. We haven't taken on any such role. We signed up without really understanding what we were signing up for. Then some comrades here got carried away. That's it. Now we're pulling back. Thank you very much. That's enough. Now, the third level. Why is this good for the very principle of freedom? Everywhere. Not just in Europe, not just in America. Because every nation that is responsible for itself, and every person who is responsible for themselves, that's decentralization. And decentralization is competition between models. And competition between models is how humanity finds out what works and what doesn't. The United States was once called the laboratory of democracy. That means, well, what's it called? It's the union of 50 laboratories. Because something is happening in each one. different laws, different things. So you look and see how well it worked out for them. Hey, let's copy that. Oh, look, these guys did badly. Let's definitely not go in that direction. A single center that dictates everything and pays for everything is always a single point of failure. A multipolar world looks bigger, noisier, and more dangerous at first glance. Probably, but it's freer. Because there is choice in it, and where there is choice, there is freedom. Have you ever wondered why, in 80 years, Europe still hasn't learned to defend itself? Because there was no need. And now the need is coming back. And along with it will return what we used to call European civilization, but in reality it was just a frozen museum version of it. Well, about 80 years ago it started to take shape and became either a wax figure or a mummy. I don't know what else to call it. That's the first story. Well, that's the biggest one today. And from it we move to the second one, because the second one is actually about the same thing. About a single decision, about the fact that America now decides for itself what it pays for and what it doesn't. Let's get back to the UN. Climate vote. May 21st, New York, General Assembly. A vote on a resolution that recognizes the legal obligation of states to combat climate change. Oh, nonsense. The basis. The 2025 advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. So it turns out we're also paying for these loafers. 141 states in favor. In favor. To commit? To fight? But how do you fight this? Nonsense, right? There you go. 8 against the group of 8 dissenters. I'll repeat it slowly because, the lineup is more important than the resolution itself. I've already named them, just to refresh your memory. Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Belarus, Yemen, Liberia, Israel, and the United States of America. Iran and Israel voted on the same side. Very funny. Notice these 8 have nothing in common. Ideologically, I mean. They're also populated by people. Liberal democracy and theocracy, authoritarianism, a collapsing state, all together. What do they really have in common? Only one thing. They do not recognize that any kind of international body can create binding rules for their internal affairs. That's the essence here. This vote is not about climate, ladies and gentlemen. Climate is a separate topic. Well, we'll make a separate video about it sometime. I've already made one. Because there are a lot of inconvenient numbers there, it's a multi-layered story, and it won't fit into a single overview. This vote is about principle, about whether a supranational assembly can create a legal obligation that is above the national constitution. Think about that, okay? We followed the Constitution and did A. It doesn't matter that it was adopted or that people voted against it. And then suddenly our representative votes for something. Our representative, one person. And suddenly they tell us, well, that's it. Now you are required to do B instead of A. Just like that. Because the UN decided so. But did we agree to this? Friedrich Hayek, an Austrian economist and Nobel laureate, described this phenomenon and gave it a name. Scientism. The use of the prestige of science to justify central planning. Climate policy is just a textbook example. A legal obligation to fight the climate. You really have to come up with something like that. Put plainly, it's so honest. The language means a legal obligation to obey the planners. Nice. And America's vote was not a voice against the climate. It was a voice against the planner. By the way, here's the same Berdyaev. Sorry for always bringing some philosophers into our conversation. He wrote that mass democracy at the international level is even more dangerous than mass democracy at the national level. 141 small states can vote for obligations that 8 major producers will have to fulfill. Well, that's democracy. Yes, but another name for it is basically collective expropriation, expropriating from the expropriator. I remember I tried to say this somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd grade of a very, very average Soviet school. Where is the right to self-determination? And so this particular expropriation of theirs will be dressed in green. Do you want to check if this vote was about climate? Let's check. Ask yourself, what does the resolution say about China, the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases? Nothing specific. And about India? Nothing. The resolution targets those who can pay, the donor. Well, and the donor says, no, not out of a bad heart, guys. Not out of a bad heart. No, it's about arithmetic. And notice America voted the way only marginal countries used to vote before. Today, this voice sounds different because behind it stands the largest economy on the planet. This means that the very model of 141 votes dictating terms to the 8 donors is beginning to fall apart. And that's also great news, because donors should be respected, guys. If they are not respected, they say, we won't give you anything anymore. Before we move on to the third story, a quick bit of information, ladies and gentlemen. We have another channel where my colleagues and I discuss current events, I would say, in more depth, with numbers, with sources, with analysis of arguments for and against, without vague wording. If you're one of those people for whom a superficial overview isn't enough, and I'm almost sure that if you've made it this far, listened up to this point, you are exactly that kind of person, then after this video, check it out. The link will be in the description. I think you'll like it. And now the third story. Maybe it's more personal than the others. Ramaphosa in the Oval Office. A year ago, on May 21, 2025, in the Oval Office, there was a meeting that a year later, that is right now, today, is worth remembering. U.S. President Donald Trump was receiving the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. By protocol, it was a routine visit. In terms of content, it was something that no American president had done in 25 years, Trump asked, as I already told you, to dim the lights. He put a folder on the table, and in the folder was statistics on murdered white farmers in South Africa, documents on the law about expropriation without compensation. Cool, expropriation without compensation, the Soviet Union. It was adopted in 24, and he showed footage. Mass funerals there and so on. He said, look, this is what's happening with you. The next day, it turned out the footage wasn't from South Africa. It was shot in Congo, and so on. Critics rejoiced, headlines all over the world. Trump used fake footage. White genocide is a myth. So they know for sure that it's not a myth, but they write it anyway. White genocide is a myth. President Shara is blocked and the U.S. is exposed. And here I want to share something with you. The footage wasn't from there. That's true. No one is disputing that. Of course, neither am I. That episode was farcical in form. It happened that footage from one country was used, and as they say, I understand that someone accidentally overlooked it. Someone probably got in trouble or was fired, right? That's unprofessional. Well, that weakened Trump's position. But here's the question. Was the question correct? It hasn't gone anywhere. And a year later, we have something we didn't have back then, so to speak. 12 months of new data. And here's what they say. In the Republic of South Africa, not a single expropriation without compensation has been stopped this year. That means, even under the new law, not a single one. The law has not been repealed, suspended, or revised. Because journalists all over the world were shouting, ha ha ha. Trump gave them a beating. He basically made it up, but in reality, there's nothing there. Although they knew perfectly well that everything was there, so the guys in South Africa said, if that's the case, then we'll go further. And they killed a bunch more people. The first groups, that is, of white refugees, emergency refugees as we define them. Trump's program to accept 10,000 white emergency refugees from South Africa. This was officially launched. The first groups have already arrived in the United States of America. Those who survived. Farm murder statistics do not formally meet the UN Convention's definition of genocide, but there is a consistent pattern of attacks specifically on isolated farms. White people. Yes, no one denies it today, including the South African police themselves. So the form a year ago turned out to be a farce. but the content is correct. Over the past year, none of the critics' arguments have stood the test of time, and the question remains exactly the same as the one Trump asked back then, unfortunately with fake footage. To understand the scale, here's a brief historical background for those who haven't been following. 1994, the end of apartheid. Nelson Mandela becomes president. The world applauds. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, multiracial democracy, the South African dream. Well, that's where it all stopped, right? People shouted, celebrated, then closed the doors and started acting. 30 years later, the party, the very one that seized power, has been in control all these years. The country is in what can mildly be called a deep economic decline. Compared to what it used to be, it's a nightmare. Unemployment is around 33%. All those people who used to work can't find jobs now. Electricity is turned off according to a schedule. And so in 1924, a law on expropriation was passed. The state can seize land without compensation if it's in the public interest. And who determines the public interest? The same party. Whites make up about 7% of South Africa's population. Historically, they have owned a significant portion of the arable land, and this is now the result of generations of work. Investments, yes, including the historical injustice of apartheid. That's all true, but the question on the table now is actually not about the past, it's about the present. And the question can be summed up in one line. Can the state expropriate private property without compensation? If the answer is yes, then no property anywhere in the world is protected, because the argument of historical justice can always be found. Every property has a past, every single one. If this argument is enough for confiscation, then everything will be confiscated. The real question is just when and who's next in line and which government is in power. One will change and they'll start confiscating from others, but actually it's just envy. Dressed up in moral language, the desire to bring everyone down, presented as a pursuit of justice, true equality. That's equality before the law and before God. Equality of outcome is always violence, always. Without exception. What has been earned cannot be taken away by voting, cannot be taken away. No vote can take it away, no vote of the majority. Demos kratos. A majority voting against the property of the minority is just tyranny in some other, well, numerical disguise. The numbers may be more respectable than the tyranny of one or a group, but it's no more legitimate. Ask yourself honestly, is it right to take land from a white farmer in Cape Town just because his great-grandfather got it improperly? Where's the guarantee that your apartment won't be taken away because my great-grandfather thinks your grandfather got it improperly back in the 50s? There is no guarantee. It's the same principle. Just like with the USSR, right? If we say it's fair in one case, then we should say it's fair in the other case too. Otherwise, we're not talking about principles. It's about tribalism. And exactly a year ago, this topic came out of silence for the first time in 25 years in the Oval Office. A topic that for 20 or 25 years was considered off-limits to talk about has now become something we can discuss. And this might be the most important thing happening in public discourse in the 21st century. In the Trump era. And now what I promised at the beginning. This week's most important observation. All three stories I just told would have been impossible 3 years ago. Not a single one. Not a single American president 3 years earlier would have withdrawn troops from Germany. None would have voted against the UN climate resolution. None would have put a folder about murdered white farmers on the table for the South African president. And about this very expropriation. That was beyond what was acceptable. Not beyond what was desired, mind you. Many wished for it. But beyond what could be spoken about. And now, in just one calendar year, right before our eyes, all three topics have ended up on the table. Not in a marginal blog, not in a dissidents podcast, but on the desk of the leader of the world's largest country. The window has shifted. The window of what can be said out loud. And that's brilliant. It has shifted. And do you know what that means for you and me? It means that what we used to talk about, well, like it was common in Russia, around kitchen tables, right? There quietly. There with a cigarette, vodka, tea, or kefir, it didn't matter. At that moment, we just talked. What did we talk about? Politics. Not because someone heard our words, but because the reality we talked about turned out to be reality. And reality always wins over illusions. Whether you want it or not, it always wins. It's just that sometimes it takes a hell of a lot of time. A generation, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Europe is starting to learn to stand up for itself. Skillfully, beautifully. Then it gave up, and now it's starting to learn. America is returning to trading with everyone and to responsibility for its own people. Its own people. No international gendarme, policeman, or anyone else. Pirate. The fact that topics that were hushed up for decades have finally been spoken out loud is also brilliant. This isn't the end of freedom, as we're told. It's the beginning. Another one, they happen once a century. That's what I think. Maybe once every 200 years. And we are lucky to be living at this very moment. Something or someone gave us Trump. Apparently, we did something right, everyone, because this is a gift. One we never even dreamed of. And it seems that all of us have been given a second chance. And this time we have no right to miss it. And you who've listened this far, you are part of this moment. You are not spectators. You are a part of it. Thank you for that. And until we meet again, bye.